Welcome to All-Time Epic Stories. Today, we present the Mahabharata's moral maze, ancient wisdom for modern ethics. 5,000 years ago, on the fertile plains of ancient India, a war was brewing that would shake the foundations of civilization itself. But this was no ordinary conflict over land or wealth. This was a battle for the very soul of Dharma, the cosmic order that holds reality together. The Mahabharata stands as humanity's longest epic poem, a labyrinth of stories within stories, each turn revealing new depths of moral complexity. Its pages contain not just the chronicle of a great war, but a mirror reflecting every ethical dilemma humans have ever faced. At the heart of this epic stands a question that haunts us still: when duty conflicts with morality, when justice demands injustice, when love requires cruelty, what path should a righteous person walk? The Mahabharata does not offer easy answers. It offers something far more valuable: the courage to ask. Our story begins in the kingdom of Hastinapura, where two sets of cousins, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, were locked in a generational conflict that would consume everything they loved. Born of the same blood, raised in the same palace, taught by the same masters, yet destined to destroy each other. The eldest Pandava, Yudhishthira, embodied truth itself. He could not speak a lie, they said. His adherence to Dharma was so complete that even the gods marveled. Yet it was this very truthfulness that would lead to catastrophe, teaching us that virtue without wisdom can become vice. Arjuna, the mighty warrior, was blessed with skills unmatched in all the world. His arrows flew like divine judgment, his aim never failed. But what use is perfect aim when you cannot decide what target deserves your arrow? What good is strength when you lack the conviction to use it? Bhima possessed the strength of 10,000 elephants, a force of nature in human form. His rage against injustice burned like sacred fire. Yet anger, however righteous, can consume the angry along with their enemies. His story asks, when does justified fury become destructive vengeance? The twins Nakula and Sahadeva, often overlooked in the shadow of their brothers, represented loyalty and wisdom. Their quiet devotion reminds us that not all heroism wears armor or wields weapons. Sometimes the greatest strength is in standing beside those we love when the whole world turns against them. And then there was Draupadi, wife to all 5 brothers, a woman of such fierce dignity that she would rather see the world burn than submit to dishonor. Her humiliation in the royal court would become the spark that ignited an apocalyptic war. Her story forces us to confront, what is the true price of justice? On the other side stood the Kauravas, led by the bitter and ambitious Duryodhana. History remembers him as a villain, but his story is more complex. He was a product of jealousy, yes, but also of circumstance, of being told from birth that his cousins were superior, more virtuous, more deserving. Duryodhana's friendship with Karna reveals something profound about human nature. He alone saw past Karna's low birth to honor his immense worth. In a society obsessed with purity of blood, Duryodhana's acceptance of Karna as an equal was revolutionary. Can virtue exist in a villain? Can vice exist in a hero? Karna himself is perhaps the most tragic figure in all of literature. Born a prince but raised by a charioteer, blessed by the gods yet cursed by fate, possessing generosity that knew no bounds yet choosing to fight for a cause that would doom him. His life asks, is loyalty to friends worth betraying justice? The elders watched, paralyzed by their own loyalties. Bhishma, the grandfather who had taken a terrible vow of celibacy to secure his father's happiness, now found himself bound to protect a throne he knew was corrupt. His vow had seemed noble once. Now it chained him to evil. Drona, the master teacher who had trained both sides with equal care, found himself forced to choose. He chose his patron, the blind king, over his conscience. His story teaches us that neutrality in the face of injustice is itself a choice, and not always the moral one. And above all these human players moved Krishna, the divine incarnate, playing a game whose rules only he fully understood. Was he a god? A philosopher? A manipulator? A savior? The Mahabharata suggests he was all of these, and that perhaps divinity itself is more morally complex than we dare imagine. The first great moral crisis came at a game of dice. Yudhishthira, the truthful king, was challenged to gamble. He knew it was wrong. He knew it was a trap. Yet Dharma demanded that a warrior king never refuse a challenge. So he played, and lost everything. First, he lost his wealth. The dice rolled against him. Then his kingdom. Still the dice betrayed him. Then his brothers, one by one. And finally, in a moment that would echo through eternity, he staked Draupadi herself. His wife. His queen. A person, treated as property. When Draupadi was dragged into court, she asked a question that lawyers and philosophers debate to this day: can a man who has already lost himself stake another person? If Yudhishthira had no rights remaining, how could he give away her rights? The court fell silent. No one could answer. Dushasana, Duryodhana's brother, attempted to disrobe her in front of the entire assembly. Elders who had praised Dharma all their lives sat silent. Warriors who claimed honor closed their eyes. And Draupadi called out to Krishna, the only one who answered her prayer for protection. The miracle of the endless sari saved her body, but her humiliation remained. In that moment, the war became inevitable. Not because of kingdoms or inheritance, but because dignity, once violated, demands restoration. Justice delayed is not justice denied, it is justice transformed into vengeance. The Pandavas were exiled for 13 years. 12 in the forest, 1 in hiding. If discovered during that final year, another 12 years would be added. The punishment was harsh, but they accepted it. Yet accepting injustice is not the same as forgiveness. They would remember. In the forest, they met sages who taught them that suffering can be a teacher. They encountered gods who tested their virtue. Each trial stripped away their arrogance, revealing the core of who they were. But here's the paradox: becoming humble can also make one more dangerous. A warrior with nothing to lose is unstoppable. During their exile, Arjuna went to the heavens to acquire divine weapons. He trained with the gods themselves. When his father Indra offered him celestial dancing girls as a reward, Arjuna refused, seeing them as sisters. Indra blessed him for this. But these weapons Arjuna gained, were they for defense or destruction? Yudhishthira faced a different test. A Yaksha, a nature spirit, had captured his brothers. To free them, Yudhishthira had to answer riddles. The most profound: what is the greatest wonder in the world? His answer: every day, people see others die, yet believe they themselves will never die. Awareness of mortality is humanity's greatest delusion. The 13th year came. The Pandavas had to live incognito in the kingdom of Virata. Arjuna, the greatest warrior alive, disguised himself as a dance teacher for the princess. Yudhishthira became a dice counselor. Bhima worked in the kitchens. How does a hero hide his greatness? By remembering that greatness is not in power but in purpose. When the 13th year ended, the Pandavas returned to claim their kingdom. They asked for just 5 villages, a place for each brother. Such a modest demand. Such a reasonable request. Duryodhana refused. He would not give them land enough to drive a needle into. Pride makes compromise impossible. Krishna himself went as a peace ambassador. The divine incarnate, counselor of cosmos, pleaded for peace. He offered compromises, solutions, paths to honor for both sides. Duryodhana tried to imprison him. To imprison God. When divine wisdom is rejected, human folly takes the throne. War became inevitable. But before armies could march, each side sought allies. Krishna himself posed an interesting choice to Arjuna and Duryodhana: you can have my army, or you can have me, unarmed, as an advisor. Arjuna chose wisdom. Duryodhana chose force. This choice would determine everything. The armies gathered on the field of Kurukshetra. Millions of soldiers, they say. The entire subcontinent had taken sides. Kings who had nothing to gain in this family dispute chose sides anyway. Why? Because neutrality in a moral crisis is not wisdom, it is cowardice disguised as prudence. On the morning of battle, Arjuna asked Krishna to drive his chariot between the armies so he could see his opponents clearly. And there, in the ranks of his enemies, Arjuna saw his teachers, his cousins, his grandfather. People he loved. People he had to kill. Arjuna's bow fell from his hands. His famous Gandiva, the divine weapon that had never failed him, slipped from nerveless fingers. He turned to Krishna and said words that would birth the Bhagavad Gita, perhaps the most important philosophical text ever written: I will not fight. What followed was not just a conversation but a revolution in ethical thinking. Krishna did not comfort Arjuna with easy platitudes. He did not say the fight was just, or that his enemies deserved death. Instead, he taught Arjuna to see beyond the immediate moral crisis to the larger cosmic order. First, Krishna explained the immortality of the soul. Bodies die, but the essence continues. Therefore, Arjuna would not truly be killing anyone, merely freeing their souls to continue their journey. But is this philosophy or rationalization? Does the permanence of the soul excuse the violence of the moment? Second, Krishna taught karma yoga, the yoga of selfless action. Act without attachment to results. Do your duty without desire for reward. Fight not because you hate your enemies, but because it is your dharma as a warrior. But can action truly be selfless when it serves our interests? Is detachment possible in the heat of battle? Third, Krishna revealed his cosmic form, the Vishvarupa. Arjuna saw infinity itself. Time devouring all things. Past, present, and future merged. He saw all these warriors already dead, the battle already fought, destiny already written. If the outcome is fixed, does free will exist? If not, how can we speak of moral choice? This vision broke Arjuna and remade him. He picked up his bow. But had Krishna convinced him or merely broken his will to resist? The Gita is praised as a spiritual masterpiece, yet it counsels a man to kill his family. Every great wisdom text contains within it the seeds of its own critique. The war began at dawn. Bhishma, the grand patriarch, led the Kaurava forces. He had promised not to kill the Pandavas, but that did not mean he would not fight. For 10 days, he was unstoppable. Arrows fell like rain. Soldiers died in thousands. The field of Kurukshetra ran red with the blood of a generation. To defeat Bhishma, Krishna counseled an act that would stain the Pandavas forever. Shikhandi, a warrior who had been born female but lived as male, would face Bhishma. The old warrior, bound by his vows never to fight women, would lower his weapons. And Arjuna would shoot him from behind Shikhandi's cover. Arjuna's arrows found their mark. Bhishma fell, but such was his power that he chose the moment of his death. He lay on a bed of arrows, waiting for the auspicious time to release his soul. For days, he lay dying, giving final counsel. Even in death, duty sustained him. But at what cost? Next came Drona, the teacher who had loved both sides as his students. To defeat him, another deception was needed. Krishna told Yudhishthira to announce that Ashvathama was dead. Ashvathama was Drona's son. Yudhishthira, who could not lie, spoke the truth with a twist: Ashvathama the elephant is dead. Drona heard that his son was dead. His will to fight collapsed. He laid down his weapons and began to meditate. And in that moment of divine trance, when he had made himself defenseless in the presence of God, Drishtadyumna beheaded him. Victory through deception. Righteousness through murder. The victors were becoming what they fought against. Karna's turn came. He faced Arjuna, his unknown brother, in single combat. Karna, who had given away his divine armor to honor a promise. Karna, who had been cursed that his weapons would fail him when he needed them most. Karna, whose chariot was stuck in the mud at the crucial moment. Karna climbed down from his chariot to free the wheel. He asked Arjuna to wait, to honor the rules of fair combat. And Krishna whispered to Arjuna, where was fairness when Draupadi was humiliated? Where was honor when Abhimanyu, a boy, was surrounded and killed by multiple warriors? Now you speak of rules. Now you want Dharma. Shoot him. Arjuna shot. Karna fell. The greatest warrior of his generation died not in fair combat but in a moment of vulnerability, killed by a brother who did not know him. His last words were about the cruel ironies of his life: born a prince, lived as a commoner, possessed divine weapons, died helpless, championed Dharma, served at Dharma. Only Duryodhana remained. The man who started it all. He hid in a lake, using his powers to create an underwater chamber. The Pandavas found him and challenged him to single combat. He chose to fight Bhima with maces. It was to be a fair fight. Finally, after all the deception, an honest battle. They fought for hours. Duryodhana, for all his faults, was a magnificent warrior. The fight was even. Too even. Krishna, watching, knew that Bhima might lose. So he signaled, a slap on his own thigh. A reminder. Bhima understood. He struck Duryodhana's thigh with his mace. A blow below the belt. Literally. Against all rules of combat. Duryodhana fell, his thighs shattered, dying slowly in agony. He looked at the Pandavas and laughed. You have won, he said, but you have lost yourselves. You claim righteousness but achieved victory through deceit, through breaking every rule you claim to hold sacred. You are no better than me. Perhaps you are worse, for you pretend to be. His words cut deeper than any weapon. Because they were true. The Pandavas had begun this war for Dharma. They would end it having violated nearly every principle they claimed to defend. They had lied. They had deceived. They had struck unfair blows. They had killed the defenseless. All for victory. All for righteousness. That night, as Duryodhana lay dying, 3 warriors who survived came to him: Ashvathama, Kripakarya, and Kritavarma. Ashvatthama, Drona's son, was mad with grief. His father had been killed through deceit. His rage demanded vengeance. Duryodhana, with his dying breath, appointed Ashvatthama commander for one final mission. That night, Ashvatthama crept into the Pandava camp. But the Pandavas were elsewhere, visiting Krishna. So Ashvatthama slaughtered everyone he found. The sons of the Pandavas. Children. The next generation, murdered in their sleep. He killed Draupadi's 5 sons, each born to a different father, each a prince of incomparable promise. When the Pandavas returned and found the slaughter, Draupadi's scream shattered the night. 5 sons, her children, butchered. The war was won, but what was the victory? A throne purchased with the blood of the next generation. A kingdom where the only heirs were ghosts. Justice achieved through mutual annihilation. The Pandavas hunted Ashvatthama. When they cornered him, he used a divine weapon of mass destruction, aiming it at the womb of Uttara, who carried the last heir of the Pandava line. The unborn child, Parikshit, was struck dead before he could be born. The cycle of violence consuming even those not yet in the world. Krishna intervened. He saved the child, reviving Parikshit in the womb. But he cursed Ashvatthama to immortality, to wander the earth for thousands of years, his wounds never healing, his guilt never absolved, his pain never ending. Is eternal punishment justice or cruelty? Is there a point where even divine vengeance becomes excessive? The war was over. 18 days of battle. Millions dead. Of the hundreds of thousands who marched to Kurukshetra, barely a handful survived. Entire bloodlines extinguished. The earth itself was said to have cried. 3 generations destroyed for a conflict that could have been resolved with 5 villages. Yudhishthira was crowned emperor. The throne he had fought for was his at last. But as he sat there, wearing the crown stained with the blood of his teachers and cousins, he felt no joy. Only emptiness. Is a kingdom won through such means truly won at all? Or is it a prize poisoned by the method of its acquisition? Gandhari, mother of the 100 Kauravas, came to the victory celebration. Blind like her husband, she had tied a cloth over her eyes in solidarity with him. When Krishna greeted her, she cursed him. Your wisdom could have prevented this war, she said. But you wanted it. You orchestrated it. You will die watching your own clan destroy itself, just as mine did. And her curse came true. Years later, Krishna's own clan, the Yadavas, fell into drunken conflict and slaughtered each other. Krishna watched his people annihilate themselves, powerless to stop it. Even God, it seems, must live with the consequences of his choices. Even divine wisdom cannot escape the karma it creates. The Pandavas ruled for years, but the joy never returned. Draupadi never recovered from the loss of her sons. Arjuna's hands shook when he remembered all he had killed. Bhima's strength seemed pointless now that there were no enemies left. Yudhishthira's truthfulness was forever compromised by the lie that killed Drona. Finally, they decided to renounce their kingdom. They would take the great journey, the Mahaprasthana, walking north to the Himalayas and beyond, toward heaven or death or perhaps both. They put a dog they had befriended at the head of their procession and began to walk, leaving everything behind. One by one, they fell. Draupadi fell first. Why? Because despite loving 5 husbands, she loved Arjuna most. Favoritism, even in love, is a flaw. Sadeva fell next, proud of his wisdom. Then Nakula, proud of his beauty. Then Arjuna, proud of his skill. Pride in virtues is still pride. Only Yudhishthira remained, walking with the dog. Indra himself came in a chariot to take Yudhishthira to heaven. But there was a condition: the dog cannot come. Dogs are impure, Indra said. Leave it behind. Yudhishthira refused. I will not abandon a creature that has been loyal to me. If heaven requires abandoning the faithful, I will not enter. The dog transformed. It was Dharma itself, Yudhishthira's divine father, testing him one final time. You have passed, Dharma said. You refused heaven rather than betray loyalty. This is righteousness. But was it a test or manipulation? Do we praise Yudhishthira for his choice or condemn the gods for their games? Yudhishthira ascended to heaven. But when he arrived, he found a shock: the Kauravas were there, enjoying celestial pleasures. Duryodhana greeted him with a smile. Where are my brothers? Yudhishthira asked. Where is Draupadi? You will find them, he was told, in another place. That other place was hell. Yudhishthira descended and found his brothers and wife suffering in torment. The sight and sounds and smells of hell assaulted him. This is wrong. He cried. They were righteous. The gods replied, everyone must experience hell for their sins, and heaven for their virtues. Even the righteous have karma to burn. But Yudhishthira's hell was brief. It was yet another test. The vision dissolved. His brothers and Draupadi were in heaven after all. The gods explained, we showed you this to test your compassion, to see if you would abandon heaven to be with those you love in hell. You would have. Therefore, you pass. And so the Mahabharata ends, but its questions do not. Every character made choices. Every choice had consequences. Some chose duty over conscience, like Bhishma. Some chose friendship over justice, like Karna. Some chose victory over honor, like the Pandavas. Were any of them purely right? Were any purely wrong? The Mahabharata refuses to give us moral certainty. It gives us something more valuable, moral sophistication. The understanding that righteousness is not a destination but a direction. That purity is less important than integrity. That perfect choices are impossible, but intentional choices are essential. Consider Yudhishthira's gambling. He knew it was wrong. He did it anyway because his dharma as a king demanded accepting challenges. But should dharma as he understood it override his conscience? Or was his real failing not that he gambled, but that he gambled with other people's freedom, treating his wife as property to be wagered? In modern terms, we might call this a conflict between rule-based ethics and consequentialist thinking. Should we follow rules regardless of outcome, or should outcomes determine our choices? The Mahabharata suggests both and neither. It suggests context matters. Wisdom matters. And sometimes, there simply is no good choice. Think of Arjuna's crisis. A modern pacifist might praise his refusal to fight. A modern soldier might condemn his moment of weakness. But Krishna does neither. Instead, he teaches Arjuna to transcend the binary of fight or flee, teaching him to act without attachment, to do his duty without desire for results. Yet this teaching is deeply troubling to some modern readers. It seems to say, do your job, even if your job is killing, and don't think too hard about it. This philosophy was cited by some during the Nuremberg trials as a defense. If duty transcends morality, what stops duty from becoming an excuse for horror? The text itself seems aware of this danger. Krishna's teaching in the Gita is complex, multi-layered. He doesn't just say do your duty. He teaches devotion, wisdom, meditation. He shows Arjuna the unity of all beings. The full teaching is a holistic philosophy, but when we extract pieces from it, we can justify almost anything. Karna's story raises questions about nature versus nurture, about whether our circumstances determine our choices. He was noble by birth but raised in poverty. Society rejected him for his apparent low status. Duryodhana accepted him. Should we judge Karna for his loyalty to someone who showed him kindness, even if that person was morally compromised? In modern ethics, we might see this as a question of moral luck. How much credit do we deserve for our virtues if we were raised to value them? How much blame for our vices if we were never taught better? Karna was generous to a fault, brave beyond measure, loyal completely. His only sin was standing with the wrong side. But they were the side that stood with him. Draupadi's humiliation speaks to every instance of gendered violence and public shaming throughout history. The men in that court who could have stopped it, and didn't, are complicit. Silence in the face of injustice is participation in injustice. The Mahabharata is clear on this: those who watched and did nothing were as guilty as those who acted. Her question to the court, can a man who has lost himself stake another person, anticipates modern discussions of bodily autonomy and human rights. No person should be treated as property. No one's dignity should be wagered in another's game. Her question went unanswered in the text because there was no answer that preserved the system as it existed. The Pandavas' use of deception in war troubles modern readers for good reason. They were the supposedly righteous side, yet they lied, cheated, and broke rules of combat. Does winning justify the means? Or did their victory become Pyrrhic the moment they compromised their principles? Can you defeat evil by becoming evil? Krishna's role in counseling these deceptions is perhaps the most morally complex element of the entire epic. He is divine, yet he advocates lying. He is wisdom incarnate, yet he teaches that rules can be broken. One interpretation: Krishna represents pragmatic ethics. The world is messy. Absolute rules applied absolutely can create absolute horror. Another interpretation: Krishna is testing whether the Pandavas will maintain their principles under pressure, and they fail. Their reward is victory, but the cost is their souls. They win the kingdom but lose themselves. Perhaps Krishna is not guiding them to triumph but showing them that triumph without principle is hollow. In modern corporate ethics, we see these same dilemmas. Do you lie to protect your company? Do you cut corners to meet deadlines? Do you sacrifice long-term values for short-term survival? Business schools teach the Mahabharata because it shows us that these questions are ancient, and that every generation must answer them anew. In medical ethics, we see Arjuna's dilemma reflected in end-of-life care. Sometimes all choices cause harm. Do you continue treatment that prolongs suffering, or do you cease treatment knowing death will follow? The Gita's teaching about detached action resonates here: act with compassion but without attachment to specific outcomes. In criminal justice, Karna's story raises questions about how we judge people. Should we consider their circumstances? Their lack of opportunity? If someone is raised in violence, are they fully responsible for perpetuating violence? Justice demands accountability, but wisdom demands context. How do we balance these? In political leadership, Yudhishthira's example teaches a hard lesson: good intentions are not enough. He meant well. He tried to be righteous. But his rigidity led to disaster. Modern leaders face the same challenge: too flexible and you stand for nothing, too rigid and you break when bending would save lives. Where is the balance? In environmental ethics, the Mahabharata's description of the war's aftermath is haunting. The earth itself mourned. Millions dead. Ecosystems destroyed. Rivers running red. We see this today in how war destroys not just people but the planet itself. Agent Orange in Vietnam. Burning oil fields in Kuwait. The environmental cost of human conflict persists for generations. In family systems therapy, the Mahabharata is a case study in generational trauma. The blind king Dhritarashtra favored his sons despite knowing they were wrong. His father Vichitravirya died young. His stepfather Bhishma had taken a vow of celibacy. Dysfunction passed down through generations, each trying to compensate for the previous generation's failures, each creating new wounds. Gandhari's choice to blindfold herself in solidarity with her blind husband seems romantic but was arguably selfish. She chose not to see her sons growing corrupt. She chose not to witness their evil. When you voluntarily blind yourself to injustice, you become complicit in it. Good people who refuse to see do as much harm as bad people who refuse to change. The concept of Dharma itself is multilayered. It means duty, righteousness, cosmic order, natural law, social obligation. When these different meanings conflict, when your duty contradicts righteousness, when social obligation violates natural law, which Dharma do you follow? The Mahabharata suggests there is no universal answer, only the answer you can live with. Modern philosophers call this moral particularism, the idea that moral truths are context-dependent, that no rule applies universally in all situations. The Mahabharata is perhaps the oldest sustained argument for this position. It shows us that truth-telling can enable murder, that loyalty can support evil, that duty can destroy Dharma. Yet the text is not purely relativistic. Some things are condemned absolutely. The humiliation of Draupadi. The murder of sleeping children. The targeting of the unborn. Even in a text that questions every moral certainty, some acts remain beyond justification. There are lines that, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. The Mahabharata teaches us that moral growth requires moral courage. The courage to question authority, to stand alone if necessary, to choose the harder right over the easier wrong. Arjuna's initial refusal to fight showed more courage than his eventual acquiescence. Questioning is not weakness. Certainty can be a form of cowardice. It teaches us that wisdom is not about having all the answers but about asking better questions. Not what is right but what factors should I consider. Not what should I do but who am I becoming through my choices. Not whether this choice is justified but whether I can live with who I become if I make it. It teaches us that consequences matter more than intentions. Yudhishthira meant well when he gambled. The Pandavas meant well when they used deception in war. But good intentions do not undo bad consequences. The children are still dead. The teachers are still betrayed. The world judges us not by what we meant to do but by what we did. It teaches us humility. Everyone in this story was certain they were right. The Pandavas knew they deserved the throne. The Kauravas knew it belonged to them. Bhishma knew his vows were sacred. Drona knew he owed loyalty to his patron. Everyone was certain. Everyone was partially wrong. Certainty is the enemy of wisdom. It teaches us about the tragedy of zero-sum thinking. The Pandavas and Kauravas saw only two possibilities, complete victory or total defeat. What if they had imagined shared power? What if they had thought beyond winner takes all? Most conflicts that seem zero-sum are actually manufactured scarcity. Most enemies could be partners if we reimagine the game. It teaches us that systems shape individuals more than individuals shape systems. Even good people became corrupted by the system of inherited power, divine right, caste hierarchy. Karna was denied opportunities because of his apparent birth. Draupadi was wagered because women were property. Reform requires changing systems, not just individuals. It teaches us about masculine toxicity long before we had that term. The entire war was driven by masculine honor culture. Insults could not be borne. Challenges could not be refused. Compromise was weakness. Pride mattered more than peace. How many died for Duryodhana's ego? How many for Yudhishthira's rigid sense of honor? Yet it also shows us alternative masculinities. Yudhishthira choosing the dog over heaven. Arjuna's moment of vulnerability before battle. Even Karna's generosity. The text contains both the toxic patterns and the seeds of their transcendence. It shows us what we are and what we might become. In the end, the Mahabharata is not a story with a moral. It is a moral education disguised as a story. Each character's choices create ripples of consequence that expand through generations. Each decision has a cost. Each value, when taken to an extreme, becomes a vice. Balance is not weakness, it is wisdom. The text asks us to hold contradictions. To see that Krishna is wise and manipulative. That the Pandavas are righteous and murderers. That Duryodhana is a villain and a victim. That justice and vengeance can be the same act seen from different angles. Moral maturity is the ability to hold complexity without collapsing into simplicity. The Mahabharata ends with everyone in heaven, but the journey there cost everything. It asks, was it worth it? Could it have been different? What would you have done? These questions have no final answer because they are not meant to be answered. They are meant to be lived with, wrestled with, carried forward into our own moral lives. Today, we face our own Kurukshetras. Climate change demands we choose between present comfort and future survival. Technology forces us to balance innovation with ethics. Social media makes us choose between truth and tribal loyalty. The dilemmas are different. The underlying moral structure is identical. When corporations prioritize profit over people, they are Duryodhana refusing to give 5 villages. When we stay silent watching injustice, we are the elders in Draupadi's humiliation. When we follow orders without question, we risk becoming Arjuna without Krishna's wisdom. The patterns repeat because human nature persists. But the Mahabharata also offers hope. It shows us that even flawed people can seek wisdom. That even compromised victories can lead to eventual understanding. That the journey toward righteousness matters even if we never fully arrive. Perfection is not the goal. Continuous moral striving is. The greatest gift of the Mahabharata is not answers but the right questions. Not what is Dharma but how do we determine Dharma in context. Not whether we should fight but what we are fighting for and who we become through fighting. Not if we will face moral dilemmas but how we will face them with integrity. 5,000 years separate us from Kurukshetra. Empires have risen and fallen. Technologies have transformed human life beyond recognition. Yet when we read of Arjuna's doubt, Draupadi's dignity, Karna's loyalty, Yudhishthira's struggles with truth, we recognize ourselves. The hardware has changed. The software remains remarkably consistent. The Mahabharata does not make us better people simply by reading it. But it can make us more thoughtful people. More aware of how our choices ripple outward. More humble about our certainties. More willing to question, to doubt, to sit with discomfort rather than rushing to false clarity. In our age of absolute positions and instant judgments, the Mahabharata's moral ambiguity is revolutionary. It insists that we slow down. Consider context. Acknowledge competing goods. Accept that sometimes there is no right answer, only the answer we can defend to ourselves when we lie awake at night reviewing our choices. The text reminds us that ethics is not abstract philosophy but lived experience. Every day, we face smaller versions of the Mahabharata's dilemmas. Do we speak up or stay silent? Do we prioritize loyalty or honesty? Do we follow rules or trust our conscience? The stakes may be smaller, but the moral structure is identical. Perhaps the deepest teaching is this: there is no way to live without causing some harm. The Pandavas learned this tragically. We are learning it ecologically, our very existence impacts the planet. But this is not an excuse for passivity. It is a call for conscious choice. If harm is inevitable, let it be minimized, acknowledged, and mourned. The Mahabharata teaches us to honor the weight of our choices. To recognize that every decision has a moral dimension. To understand that convenience is not the same as correctness. To know that history will judge us not by our intentions but by our actions and their consequences. To choose anyway, with as much wisdom as we can gather. And finally, it teaches us compassion, for others who face impossible choices, and for ourselves when we fail to live up to our ideals. Everyone in the Mahabharata was trying their best with what they knew. They all failed in different ways. They were human. So are we. The point is not to avoid all failure but to fail forward, learning and growing. The ancient epic ends, but its moral maze continues in every generation. The characters may wear different clothes, speak different languages, fight different battles. But they face the same fundamental questions: what is right? What is just? What can I live with? What legacy do I leave? The Mahabharata cannot answer these questions for us. But it can teach us how to ask them better, and perhaps that is the greatest wisdom of all. The Mahabharata remains alive because its questions remain unanswered. Each generation must walk its own path through the moral maze. What choices will you make when dharma and duty conflict? When justice demands injustice? When love requires cruelty? The epic offers no final answers, only the wisdom to keep questioning. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Mahabharata's timeless dilemmas. If this story resonated with you, share it with others who grapple with difficult choices. Subscribe for more explorations of ancient wisdom that speaks to modern life. Remember, the greatest stories don't give us answers, they give us better questions. Until next time, may you walk your path with wisdom, compassion, and courage.